Salutations to all our future judges. In this video, we are going to see Indian Evidence Act 1872. But before going into the video, I'd like to make few requests to our viewers as well as the subscribers. Kindly do not skip the video. Watch the video from the beginning till the end. If you skip in between, you may be missing very crucial information or very crucial aspects which have been explained. Hence, watch from the beginning till the end. And next request is, please do have a notebook and a pen with you, because various questions which have been asked in Evidence Act in various exams would be mentioned or would be stated. And in addition to this, idea would be given as to how questions could be framed in a particular section. It is very important for you. So you all need to make a note of all these aspects. And in addition to this, some additional illustrations would also be given while teaching the act. Hence, you please make a note of all those additional illustrations as well. They would be of absolute help to you in understanding the particular section. And in addition to this, various ways or techniques would be taught which would help you to remember those sections, or to say some memory techniques would be given. This would be really helpful to you in remembering the sections when you go to the exam. I hope this video would be of absolute and great utility to you. Section 110. Burden of proof as to ownership. Let us imagine a scenario. The court is having a question whether a person is owner of anything, whether he is the owner or he is not the owner. That is the question which is coming before the court. So in that case, the person is showing or proving to the court that he is in possession of the property. In that case, the person who is claiming that he is not the owner should prove to the court that the person who claims the possession is not the owner of the property. So the burden of proving is on the person who claims that the particular person is not the owner, or the person who claims the possession is not the actual owner. Let us try to understand this by way of an example. There is a house and that house is in possession of B. A goes to the court saying that B is not the owner of the property. B goes to the court and shows his possession or proves his possession. In that case, burden of proof is on A. Section 111. Proof of good faith in transactions where one party is in relation of active confidence. Now imagine a scenario. You have active confidence in me, based on which you execute a sale deed in my favor. So in that case, I have to prove to the court that you had good faith in me, or you had active confidence in me, and the transaction was done in good faith. So it is my duty to prove to the court. Let us try to understand this by way of examples. Illustration A. There is an attorney or an advocate and there is a client. So this client has got active confidence in the advocate. So in that case, this client is registering a property in the name of the advocate. That is, he is executing a sale deed in favor of the advocate. So now this client is going to the court against the said property by way of a suit. In that case, the burden of proving the good faith of the transaction is on the advocate. So advocate has to prove to the court that he paid the money or the consideration which is required for the property, then he had obtained the property. Now let us move to the next example. A son who has attained the age where he can enter into a contract very recently. So he executes a sale in favor of his father. In this case, the father has to prove to the court that this sale deed was executed in good faith. And if the son is going to file a suit against his father, it becomes the duty of the father to prove to the court that he had paid or he has given the valid consideration to his son to get that particular property. Or we can simply understand this, that the burden of proving the good faith of the transaction is on the father. Section 111A, Presumption as to certain offences. Imagine if someone is acting against the government or trying to wage a war against the government or trying to do something which is against a country, particularly India in this case. So in that case, how that person should be treated or how presumption should be done. So if a person is accused of having committed any offense of such nature, then in that case, in any area which is declared to be disturbed area under any enactment, imagine the court or the government is saying that a particular area is a disturbed area. So in that case, there are provisions for suppression of disorder and restoration and maintenance of public order. Or if there is an area in which over a period of more than 1 month, extensive disturbance of public peace has taken place. So if that person has been in this particular area with firearms or explosives, then in that case the court will presume that this person has taken part in that act or he is resisting the armed forces or other forces which are trying to maintain public order. In that case also, the court would presume that this person has done or was involved in the offences referred to in subsection 2. So as simple as that, if a person is in an area where some disturbance is there and he has used firearms or explosives, or at a time when firearms or explosives were used at that particular place, he was present there, then in that case the court will presume that this person was taking part in the crime. Let us move to section 112. Birth during marriage, conclusive proof of legitimacy. In this particular section, there are various aspects which we need to analyze. If a person was born during the continuance of a valid marriage between his mother and any man, so A and B got married and that marriage is valid, at that time a child is born, that child is legitimate. Next option. So A and B are married and after that the marriage is dissolved. So from the date of marriage, within 280 days, if a child is born and the mother is also remaining unmarried during this 280 days, then in that case the child born is legitimate and it shall be a conclusive proof that this child is the legitimate son of that man, unless it is shown that the parties to the marriage had no access to each other at that time when they could have got begotten, he could have been begotten. So simply we can understand that within 280 days, if a child is born, if the marriage is dissolved and the child is born during the existence of marriage and the mother is remaining unmarried within these 280 days, these three aspects are important. Section 113. Section 113 is not of that great importance, but still it is better to know this section. So if there is a notification in the Gazette of India stating that a native state prince or ruler has been ceded before the commencement of Part 3 of the Government of India Act 1935, in that case it shall be a conclusive proof. However, now things have changed. Just if you know this section, that is enough. However, Section 113A is very important. Presumption as to abetment of suicide by a married woman. There are two aspects in this particular section which you need to know. Imagine A and B get married. Within 7 years of marriage, this girl commits suicide. And during the 7 years time, her husband and her husband's relative had subjected this lady to cruelty. So in that case, the court can presume that this amounts to abetment of suicide by a married woman. So the court presumes that the husband and his relatives had abetted the suicide. Explanation is also given. Cruelty shall have the same meaning as defined in section 498 of Indian Penal Code. So whatever has been said as cruelty in section 498A will also apply in this particular section. Section 113B, presumption as to dowry death. Now there is a question before the court. The question is whether a person has committed the dowry death of a woman. Now the court will start understanding the case, and if it is shown that before the death of this woman she has been subjected to cruelty or harassment, and that harassment or cruelty is connected with a demand for dowry, in that case the court shall presume that such person has caused the dowry death. The word dowry death shall have the same meaning as given in 304B of the Indian Penal Code. Now let us move to section 114. Court may presume existence of certain facts. We can try to understand this particular section in a simple manner. So, what a normal man will do when a certain thing happens. If we don't do like that, then the court will presume certain things. That is very important. Now let us try to understand this particular section by way of illustrations what have been provided. Illustration A. If a person is immediately in possession of a goods after the theft, then court will presume that this person is a thief, or he has received the goods knowing them to be stolen. That is illustration A. Illustration B. Accomplice is unworthy of credit unless he is corroborated in material particulars. So, if person A is committing a crime and B is helping him, then in that case, whatever B says cannot be taken into consideration. He is an accomplice. Court cannot believe him. Next is C. A bill of exchange accepted or endorsed. Then in that case, the court will obviously believe that bill of exchange is a valid document and it has been accepted or endorsed for good consideration. Next is illustration D. So that a thing or state of things which has been shown to be in existence within a period shorter than that within which such things or states of things usually cease to exist is still in existence. Let us try to understand this in a simple manner. Imagine you are buying a new motorcycle, and it is assumed or it is generally known that that particular motorcycle will not have any problem for 5 years. So if the motorcycle is just 3 years old, then the court will presume that this motorcycle is in a working condition because 5 years is not yet completed. Now let us move to the next illustration E. So if a judicial and official acts have been regularly performed, imagine there is a staff in the judiciary. He is doing his work on a regular basis. In that case, the court will presume that he has done his job. Simple. Now let us move to next illustration F. That the common course of business has been followed in a particular cases. Imagine I am doing a business and regularly I do it in a particular pattern, and I have been doing this for so many years. So the court will presume like in common course the business is being done like this. Next is illustration G. Imagine I am having an evidence. I can produce it in the court, it shouldn't be a problem. But still I have not produced that particular evidence in the court. Then the court will presume that I have not produced this because that particular evidence is unfavorable or that particular evidence is against me, and that is the reason I have not produced that particular evidence to the court. Next is illustration H. So, if a man refuses to answer a question, he is not actually compelled by the law to answer that question. It is an obvious fact. So, he need not answer, but still he refuses to answer the question. Then the court will presume that he did not answer it because it would be unfavorable to him. Next is illustration I. When a document creating an obligation is in the hands of the obligor, the obligation has been discharged. We'll try to understand this in a simple manner. Imagine I am signing a document to my friend saying that I have to pay you 10,000 rupees within 3 months. And that particular original document is with me. I did not give it to my friend. The court will presume that the document is with me because whatever money I have taken from my friend has been repaid, and that is the reason my friend has given the original document to me. So the court will presume so. However, there are certain exceptions to this. Exception to illustration A. Imagine there is a shopkeeper and he has in his bill a marked rupee soon after it was stolen, and he cannot account for its possession but is continually receiving rupees in the course of his business. So what they are trying to say is, imagine person A has stolen cash from a house. So there are some marks in that particular cash what he has stolen. He goes to the supermarket and buys some product. So the shopkeeper, he doesn't know that it is a stolen cash. He simply receives it because it is happening in the normal course of business. He takes the money, puts it in his locker or wherever he places his cash, a safety locker or his cash tray. Then the police comes and gets hold of the shopkeeper. Then the shopkeeper says, "Sir, I don't know that it is a stolen money. He gave that money to me and he took some products. I gave it to him." So in that case, this shopkeeper cannot be accused. Next, illustration B. A person of the highest character, is tried for causing a man's death by an act of negligence in arranging certain machinery. B. A person of equally good character who also took part in the arrangement describes precisely what was done and admits and explains the common carelessness of A and himself. So there is a big mission which is being fixed in a place. It was wrongly fixed, due to which a man died. So there were two people who were involved in fixing this mission, A and B. A is also of a very good character, and B is also a person of equally good character. Both are of highest good character. So this B comes to the court and says, yes, we both arranged it actually. We did some mistake due to which the mission collapsed and that person died. In this case, though he is an accomplice, the court can accept his statement because he is a person of genuine character and he describes precisely as to what was done and how it happened. Now let us move to the next exception to illustration. There are three people A, B and C who commit a crime. Now they are separated for enquiry. A is enquired separately, B is enquired separately, C is enquired separately. They are kept separate. Then all the three during the enquiry say that there was one person called D. He was the main person who made us do all these things. And each one of them individually identifies D as the person who is behind the crime. So in that case, this corroboration can be accepted. because these three people unanimously say the same name. So it is presumed that D is also involved. Next is exception to illustration C. There is one person by name B. He is being influenced by A. And this person B is also young and ignorant. So in that case, this falls as an exception to illustration C referred above. Because this A is influential. He is influencing B, due to which this transaction takes place. Next is exception to illustration D. It is proved that a river ran in a certain course 5 years ago, but it is known that there have been floods since that time, which might change its course. So, if I'd say like there is a river which is flowing in a particular direction, after some time what happens is the river changes its course naturally. So in that case, I can prove to the court like, see, the river was supposed to flow like this. The river has changed its course. Then how can I be responsible? So in that case, this will be an exception. Next is illustration E and its exemption actually. A judicial act, the regularity of which is in question, was performed under exceptional circumstances. So a judicial act is being performed. Now the court is questioning its regularity. In that case, the person who claims the exemption has to prove to the court that there was some exceptional circumstances due to which the judicial act was done, though it is not regular. Exception to illustration F. So there is a question whether a letter was received. So simply in the normal course, if you post a letter, it should go and reach the person in normal course, unless it is interrupted by disturbances. So if there are some disturbances which interrupts the delivery of the post, but the usual course of the post was interrupted by disturbances. So if I am going to the post office and posting a letter, my job is done. If there are some disturbances during the delivery, I cannot be held responsible for that. Next is exception to illustration G. A man refuses to produce a document which would bear on a contract of small importance on which he is sued, but which might also injure the feelings and reputation of his family. There is a document. I am not producing the document in the court. That document has got very less impact or very small impact in the contract or the problem for which the case is being filed. In that case, if I produce this document, that will spoil the reputation of my family. In that case, this will be an exception to illustration G. Exception to illustration H. So there is a man who refuses to answer a question which is not compelled by law to answer. But if he answers this particular question, it might cause loss to him in matters unconnected with the matter in relation to which it is asked. So the court is asking a question to a person. He need not answer that question actually, and he does not prefer to answer that question because he says, if I answer this question, it will cause a loss in some other matter which is not connected to this particular case. So in that case, this will be an exception to illustration H. Next is exception to illustration I. So if there is a bond which is in possession of the obliger, but the circumstances show that he might have stolen it actually. Imagine I am writing a bond and giving it to my friend, but what I do is, without the knowledge of my friend, I sneak into his house and then I steal that bond and I take it with me. So in that case, this illustration I will not apply. This particular instance will be an exception to that illustration I. Next is section 114A. Presumption as to absence of consent in certain prosecution for rape. This 114A section is very important. Generally, if a man has a sexual intercourse with a woman, and that is also proved that this man had sexual intercourse with that lady. Now, the question is whether it was done with the consent of the woman or without the consent of women. So, in that case, if the woman gets into the witness box and gives an evidence stating that she did not consent, then in that case, the court will always presume that she did not consent. Sexual intercourse will have the same meaning referred to in section 375A to D of Indian Penal Code. So, if a lady says, no, I did not consent to have a sexual intercourse, court will presume the words of the women to be true. I hope you would have liked the video. If you like the video, please do press the thumbs up button and do share the video with your friends and motivate them. If you are not subscribed the channel, please do subscribe the channel and share the channel with your friends. If you feel that I've left something in this video or you want me to change the way in explanations are given for the sections, please do let me know by way of comments. Let us join hands together and contribute for a learned society. Thank you.